What did students do in the 13th century when their brains felt fried from endless Latin lectures and debates on theology? When the weight of scholastic life in places like Oxford, Paris, and Bologna became too much between the 1100s and the 1500s, how did they unwind? Did they just study more? Number 8. Unleashing chaos on the streets with wild games. Medieval student life was not all dusty parchments and hushed libraries. The moment a scholar stepped out of the lecture hall, a wild energy could ignite, especially when it came to street games. These were not your organized, rule-bound sports. They were often chaotic, rough, and frankly dangerous. Take football, for instance. Forget the neatly marked pitches and precise rules of the modern game. Medieval football was a sprawling, brutal affair, often involving hundreds of participants from different colleges, or even different parts of the city. The objective was simple: get a ball, sometimes an inflated pig's bladder, from one end of a town to the other, often miles apart, using any means necessary. There were no limits on player numbers, no official teams, and very few rules beyond don't actually kill someone with intent. Imagine a student named Fitzwilliam, a strapping young man from Christ Church College, Oxford, in the year 1320. He would gather with dozens of his fellow scholars, facing off against students from Oriel College. The pitch was the entire town, from the narrow lanes near Carfax to the open fields beyond the city walls. The ball would be kicked, punched, carried, and fought over with an intensity that would shock any modern athlete. Legs were tripped, shins were kicked, and bodies collided with resounding thuds. Shops would have their windows smashed, market stalls would be overturned, and innocent townsfolk would flee in terror as the human tide surged through the streets. Accounts from the period describe games lasting for hours, sometimes even days, turning into full-blown street brawls. King Edward II himself, in 1314, issued an edict banning football in London, stating that it led to many evils and public disturbance. Yet, students, always on the edge of rebellion, ignored such decrees, finding hidden meadows and secluded grounds to continue their violent pastime. The sheer physicality and raw energy of these games offered a profound release from the sedentary academic life. A chance to burn off steam and assert their physical prowess beyond football, wrestling was another favorite. This wasn't a formal sport with mats and weight classes. It was often impromptu, a challenge thrown down in a college courtyard or a village green. A student like Geoffrey, known for his broad shoulders and formidable grip, might challenge a fellow scholar to a grapple, or even a burly townsman who dared to insult him. The objective was often to throw your opponent to the ground or force them to submit. Injuries were common. Sprained ankles, dislocated shoulders, and bruised ribs were badges of honor. Students often practiced with staves, long wooden poles used for walking, but also for mock combat. They would spar in open fields, mimicking the sword play of knights, dodging and thrusting with surprising agility. These duels, though playful, sharpened their reflexes and provided an outlet for competitive aggression. Sometimes these mock battles escalated into real fights, especially if outsiders got involved, adding another layer of danger to the students' recreational activities. Archery was another popular activity, particularly for students from wealthier families who might have learned it from a young age. Fields just outside the city walls, often near the riverbanks, would become impromptu shooting ranges. Students would bring their longbows, often simple wooden ones, and compete to hit targets. Whether it was a straw dummy or a distant tree, the focus required for archery, the drawing back of the string, the aiming, and the release, offered a different kind of mental break from studies. It was a precise skill, and mastering it gave a sense of accomplishment. Tournaments were sometimes organized with small prizes like a flask of wine or a new quill. A student named Piers from Merton College, Oxford, was said to be an expert archer, able to split a willow wand from 20 paces, a skill that earned him respect among his peers. The satisfying thwack of the arrow hitting its target, the feel of the bow in their hands, and the camaraderie of competition provided a stark contrast to the quiet contemplation of scholastic work. It was a way to reconnect with their bodies, with the outdoors, and with the primal thrill of skill and competition, far removed from the complex arguments of philosophy or law. Number 7. The thrill of forbidden romance and secret rendezvous. The world of medieval scholarship was largely a male one, and for many students, especially those destined for the clergy, celibacy was a theoretical expectation, if not always a practical reality. Yet, the vibrant, bustling cities where universities thrived were also hotbeds of human connection and desire. Students, far from home and often living independently for the first time, were just as susceptible to the pangs of love and lust as anyone else. Finding ways to pursue romance, however, was often a thrilling, dangerous game of cat and mouse, with university authorities, moral guardians, and sometimes even angry townspeople. Secret meetings were the bread and butter of student romance. Imagine a student named Thomas, a young man studying canon law in Paris during the late 14th century. His heart was set on a local baker's daughter, Ilara, whose family lived just off the Rue Saint-Jacques. Their courtship involved whispered conversations during hurried visits to the bakery, discreet glances exchanged during market days, and, most importantly, secret letters passed through intermediaries, perhaps a sympathetic servant or a fellow student. These notes, often written in code or flowery language, would arrange clandestine meetings. Preferred locations were often secluded spots outside the city walls, near the river Seine, where the shadows of trees offered cover, or in quiet corners of less frequented churches during the late afternoon. Sometimes, if they were brave or foolish, they might meet in a quiet tavern, choosing a dark booth where they could speak in hushed tones, hoping the raucous noise would drown out their confessions. The thrill of the forbidden, the risk of discovery, only heightened the intensity of these encounters. For a young scholar, steeped in logical arguments and theological debates, the irrational, overwhelming force of infatuation was a potent and exhilarating escape. For those seeking more immediate gratification, the ladies of the night offered a different kind of companionship. Medieval cities, despite their religious piety, often had thriving red light districts. In places like Bologna, known for its law school, courtesans and prostitutes were a visible part of the urban landscape. Students, often with more disposable income than the average laborer and a distinct lack of supervision, frequented these establishments. They offered not just physical intimacy, but also a space for uninhibited conversation, laughter, and a break from the rigid decorum of academic life. These women, often known by colorful names like Bella of the Blue Eyes or Rosa of the Market, provided a different kind of education, one not found in any textbook. Patrons were diverse, from wealthy merchants to humble apprentices, and students fit right in. The risk of venereal disease, societal disapproval, and potential punishment from university proctors or the town watch was ever present. Yet the allure of these forbidden pleasures often outweighed the dangers for many young scholars. The consequences of getting caught could be severe. A student caught with a woman outside the confines of his college might face fines, public humiliation, or even expulsion. If the woman was considered respectable, and especially if she was a townswoman, the student could face the wrath of her family, leading to street brawls or formal complaints to the university authorities. There are records of students being publicly shamed, sometimes paraded through the streets, or forced to perform penance. Despite these strictures, love, lust, and companionship persisted. Students wrote passionate love poetry, sometimes anonymously, expressing their deepest desires and frustrations. These verses, often circulated amongst close friends, served as another outlet, a way to explore emotions that were suppressed in their daily lives. A student named Richard, studying in Paris, was rumored to have had a series of passionate but fleeting affairs, his clandestine meetings becoming the subject of whispered gossip among his peers. Pursuit of love, whether genuine affection or fleeting desire, was a powerful, humanizing force that provided a vivid contrast to the dry, intellectual pursuits of their studies, offering a taste of the real world and its complex, often dangerous pleasures. Number 6. Strategic minds, board games, and witty challenges. Not every student sought release in rowdy taverns or on the violent football field. Many found their escape in the quiet, focused intensity of strategic games, pitting their minds against fellow scholars. These were games that demanded intellect, foresight, and a keen understanding of tactics, much like their academic pursuits, but without the pressure of examination or the rigid demands of their professors. These games were often played in common rooms, in private lodgings, or even discreetly in the corners of noisy taverns. Chess was, without a doubt, the king of medieval board games. Introduced to Europe from the Arab world centuries earlier, it quickly became a favorite pastime among the educated elite, including students. The intricate dance of the pieces across the checkered board, the endless possibilities of moves, and the deep strategic thinking required to checkmate an opponent made it a perfect challenge for minds trained in logic and argumentation. Students would spend hours, sometimes entire evenings, hunched over a wooden board, contemplating their next move, the air thick with concentration. The game was seen not just as entertainment, but as a mental exercise, a way to sharpen one's faculties. There were even treatises written on chess strategy, reflecting its intellectual prestige. A student named Gregory, a gifted scholar from Lincoln College, Oxford, was renowned throughout the university for his chess prowess. He was said to be able to defeat his opponents in a mere 20 moves, sometimes even playing multiple games simultaneously, his mind racing through permutations. Others would gather around watching silently, sometimes offering hushed advice, until one player's king was cornered. Beyond chess tables, a family of games similar to modern backgammon was incredibly popular. Played on a board with points and using dice, tables was faster paced than chess and often involved more direct gambling. The element of chance, introduced by the dice, made it thrilling, but it still required skill in moving your pieces and blocking your opponent. Unlike chess, which was sometimes seen as a noble pursuit, tables could be frowned upon by authorities because of its association with gambling, and often led to heated arguments over stakes. Yet, students loved the quick victories and the immediate gratification it offered. A group of students from Bologna, weary from their lectures on Roman law, might gather in their rented rooms, clattering dice against the wooden table. The tension palpable as fortunes shifted with each roll. Losing a game of tables could mean losing your next meal, or even your precious textbooks, if the stakes were high enough. Another popular board game was Nine Men's Morris, a simpler but still strategic game involving moving pieces to form rows of 3. It was often drawn directly onto a wooden table, or even scratched into the dirt, using pebbles or coins as pieces. It offered a quicker mental challenge, a game that could be started and finished in a short break between classes, or while waiting for a meal. While less complex than chess, it still required careful planning and the ability to anticipate an opponent's moves. Intellectual challenges weren't limited to physical boards. Students also engaged in witty debates and riddle competitions for pure entertainment. After a long day of formal disputations, they would unwind by engaging in informal arguments about absurd topics, trying to outwit each other with clever rhetoric and logical fallacies. A student might propose a question like, which is more useful, a broken sword or a blunt quill, and then argue for an hour, delighting in the verbal sparring. Riddle games, where one student posed a complex question and others tried to deduce the answer, were another common pastime. These weren't the academic riddles found in philosophical texts, but often playful, sometimes bawdy, or even politically satirical. A student named Bartholomew from Heidelberg was known for his sharp wit and his ability to compose impromptu riddles that stumped even his professors, earning him a reputation as a mischievous genius among his peers. These games, whether on a board or through verbal sparring, provided a sophisticated form of escapism, allowing students to flex their intellectual muscles in a relaxed, competitive, and often humorous environment. Number 5. Feasting and extravagant celebrations. While daily student meals in medieval colleges were often meager, monotonous, and strictly portioned, the occasional feast or celebratory banquet offered a spectacular and much anticipated escape. These were not mere meals, they were grand events, vibrant spectacles that temporarily dissolved the rigid academic routine and ushered in an atmosphere of unbridled revelry. These celebrations often marked significant calendar events, such as saints' days, the arrival of a notable dignitary, or the successful completion of academic terms. Imagine the atmosphere in a college hall at Cambridge during a Christmas feast in the early 15th century. The normally austere dining hall with its high ceilings and stone walls would be transformed. Torches and candles would cast a warm, flickering glow, illuminating banners and tapestries brought out for the occasion. Long wooden tables, usually bare, would groan under the weight of an unimaginable spread of food. Unlike the daily pottage and coarse bread, this was a culinary extravaganza. Roasted meats were the centerpiece. Whole roasted pigs with apples in their mouths, swans and peacocks re-feathered in their plumage, venison and various fowl. Piled alongside were pies, pasties, rich stews, and bread both common and fine. Sweet dishes, still a rarity, might include fruit tarts, spiced cakes, and perhaps even early forms of marzipan. And to wash it all down, not just the ubiquitous ale, but fine wines, often imported from France or the Rhineland, flowed freely from large pitchers. The entertainment at these feasts was as lavish as the food. Musicians, sometimes students themselves, but often hired professionals, would play lutes, harps, flutes, and drums, filling the hall with lively melodies. Jesters or fools would perform antics and tell jokes, often at the expense of professors or local dignitaries, drawing roars of laughter from the assembled scholars. Storytellers would recite epic poems or humorous tales, their voices booming through the hall. Sometimes even short theatrical performances, mummers' plays or morality plays, would be staged, featuring students or local actors. The conversation would be boisterous, filled with laughter, gossip, and the occasional heated but good-natured argument. Students, normally constrained by rules of decorum, could genuinely let their hair down. A student named Giles, usually reserved and bookish, might be seen leading a chorus of a bawdy drinking song, his face flushed with wine and merriment. Beyond the official college feasts, groups of wealthier students would sometimes organize their own private banquets. Pooling their allowances, they would rent a private room in a larger inn, or even a house, hiring cooks and musicians for an evening of pure indulgence. These smaller, more intimate gatherings often allowed for even greater freedom and less oversight from college authorities. They might invite a select group of friends, perhaps even a few local acquaintances, to share in the extravagance. A student from a noble family, like young Lord Edward from Pembroke College, might host a particularly grand affair, demonstrating his family's wealth and generosity. These private feasts were a statement, a display of status, and a testament to their desire for luxury and pleasure away from the ascetic life expected of scholars. These feasts were not just about consumption. They were powerful social events. They strengthened bonds between students from different faculties or nations, fostered camaraderie within a college, and offered a vital psychological break from the relentless pressure of study. They were moments of collective joy, a reminder that even in the rigorous world of medieval academia, there was always room for celebration, excess, and the pure, unadulterated pleasure of good company, fine food, and abundant drink. For a brief period, the anxieties of exams and the strictures of monastic-like discipline faded away, replaced by the warm glow of fellowship and the satisfying fullness of a truly grand meal. Number 4. Town versus gown. Epic street brawls. Few things offered a more potent release of pent-up student energy than a full-blown town versus gown riot. These were not mere squabbles. They were often massive, violent clashes between the students of a university and the local townsfolk, often fueled by long-standing resentment, cultural differences, and immediate provocations. These conflicts could erupt suddenly, escalate rapidly, and sometimes lead to serious injuries or even deaths, becoming defining, if notorious, events in a university's history. The sparks that ignited these urban conflagrations were often incredibly trivial. A student might complain about the price of ale at a local tavern, accusing the landlord of cheating him. A scholar might insult a merchant's wife as she walked down the street. A damaged cart belonging to a townsman could block a student's path, leading to an angry exchange. Or it might be something as simple as a student roughhousing with a group of friends and accidentally bumping into a local apprentice. But these minor incidents were merely the kindling. The underlying fuel was a deep-seated antagonism. Townsfolk often resented the special privileges granted to students by royal or papal decree, such as exemption from certain taxes or the right to be tried by university courts, rather than town magistrates. They also saw students as arrogant, rowdy, and disrespectful. Students, on the other hand, viewed townsfolk as greedy, uneducated, and provincial, especially if they came from noble or wealthy families. Once a confrontation began, it would spread like wildfire. A single punch thrown, a rock hurled, or a shouted insult would draw in bystanders. Students, often living in close proximity and forming strong bonds within their colleges or nations, would quickly rally to defend a fellow scholar. Cry of "gown" would echo through the narrow streets, summoning a wave of angry students, armed with whatever they could find: wooden staves, walking sticks, rocks, daggers, or even broken furniture. Townsfolk, equally quick to defend their own, would grab tools from their workshops, pitchforks, axes, or anything else that could serve as a weapon, shouting "town." The streets would transform into a chaotic battleground. Market stalls would be overturned, windows shattered, and innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. One of the most infamous examples is the St. Scholastica Day riot in Oxford, which occurred on February 10, 1355. It began with a dispute over the quality of wine served at the Swindlestock Tavern. A student and his clerk complained to the taverner, John Croydon, about the quality of the wine. When Croydon responded with saucy language, the student threw the wine in his face and then hit him with the pot. The argument escalated, and soon a mob of students arrived, attacking the taverner and his neighbors. The mayor and townsmen rang the church bell of St. Martin's, signaling a general alarm for the town. The university proctors rang the bells of St. Mary's, rallying the scholars. For 2 days, students and townspeople engaged in pitched battles across Oxford. Townsmen, reinforced by armed peasants from the surrounding countryside, stormed student halls, broke into colleges, and killed students. Students, though initially holding their own, were eventually overwhelmed. The riot resulted in dozens of deaths, predominantly students, and widespread destruction. The aftermath saw the king siding with the university, forcing the town of Oxford to pay a perpetual annual fine and requiring the mayor and bailiffs to attend a special service at St. Mary's each year, swearing an oath to uphold the university's privileges. These riots, while destructive and often tragic, served as a raw, unfiltered outlet for student frustration and a means to assert their collective identity and power. They were a violent release, a physical manifestation of the tensions between privileged scholars and the common folk. For the students, these brawls were not just about winning a fight. They were about defending their honor, asserting their rights, and blowing off a massive amount of steam in the most dramatic way possible. Number 3. Serenade the night, music, song, and storytelling. Amidst the raucous tavern visits and the brutal street brawls, medieval students also found more harmonious ways to blow off steam. Through music, song, and storytelling. These were not just passive forms of entertainment, they were often highly participatory, fostering camaraderie, expressing emotions, and preserving cultural traditions. Whether in the quiet confines of a student's room, a bustling college common hall, or even in the dimly lit corner of an inn, the sounds of melody and the weaving of tales provided a cherished escape from academic rigor. Instruments were a common sight among students, especially those from more affluent backgrounds. The lute, with its gentle, melancholic sound, was particularly popular. Many students would own one, practicing intricate melodies in their private lodgings or accompanying themselves as they sang. The flute and the recorder, small and portable, were also favored for their simplicity and pleasant tones. Some students, with a flair for the dramatic, might even play a small drum or tambourine, adding a rhythmic pulse to impromptu musical sessions. Imagine a group of students in Paris, gathered in a cramped garret room after a long day of lectures on Aristotle. One student, a talented lutenist named Walter, might strum a haunting melody, while others joined in with flutes, their combined sounds weaving through the evening air, providing a stark contrast to the scholarly Latin they had been immersed in all day. These informal jam sessions were a chance to unwind, to express emotions that couldn't be conveyed in logical arguments, and to simply enjoy the beauty of sound. Singing was perhaps the most universal form of musical expression. Students would sing popular ballads of the day, often telling tales of knights, chivalry, and tragic love. They would also compose and sing their own songs, satirical verses about their professors, witty critiques of university rules, or bawdy drinking songs that would have scandalized their tutors. These songs, passed orally from student to student, formed an integral part of student culture. A student named Piers, from the German nation in Bologna, was known for his booming voice and his vast repertoire of songs, from solemn hymns to ribald tunes that caused uproarious laughter. Groups singing, especially after a few flagons of ale, could reach a fever pitch, with students linking arms and belting out their favorite tunes, letting their voices reverberate through the night. These collective vocalizations built a strong sense of community and shared identity, a chorus against the isolation of solitary study. Storytelling was another cherished pastime, a way to transport themselves and their companions to different worlds. Students would gather around a flickering fire or a single candle, captivated by tales of ancient heroes, mythical beasts, or mischievous folk figures. Many scholars were well versed in classical literature, and they would recount tales from Virgil, Ovid, or the Bible, often embellishing them with their own flair. They also shared local legends, ghost stories, or even accounts of recent travels and adventures. These narrative sessions were not just for entertainment. They honed their rhetorical skills, their ability to captivate an audience, and their memory. Some students were exceptional raconteurs, able to hold a room spellbound with their vivid descriptions and dramatic delivery. A student from Salerno studying medicine might tell chilling tales of ancient plagues or amusing anecdotes from his own village, sparking both fear and laughter among his listeners. Sometimes, these musical and storytelling sessions would evolve into impromptu poetry slams. Students, many of whom were learning to write Latin poetry, would try their hand at composing verses on the spot, challenging each other to rhyme or to construct clever literary allusions. These were often witty, sometimes crude, and always competitive, a playful display of their linguistic prowess. The laughter and applause from their peers provided a different kind of reward than a professor's approval. These expressive outlets, far from the formal rigidity of their studies, allowed medieval students to connect on a deeper, more emotional level, fostering bonds of friendship and providing a much-needed release for their creative and social energies. Number 2. Pranks and academic rebellion. Beyond the sanctioned methods of blowing off steam, medieval students, much like their modern counterparts, found immense joy and release in defying authority through elaborate pranks and acts of academic rebellion. These were often mischievous, sometimes destructive, and always designed to inject a dose of chaos and humor into the otherwise strict and disciplined environment of the university. The thrill of outwitting professors, frustrating college officials, and bending the rules provided a unique kind of satisfaction. One of the most common forms of rebellion was simply skipping lectures. While fines and punishments were in place for truancy, students developed an impressive array of evasive tactics. They might forge elaborate excuses, claiming illness, family emergency, or even a sudden, inexplicable need to visit a distant relative. Some would sneak out of college gates during hours when they were supposed to be attending class, often by bribing porters or finding unguarded exits. The sheer ingenuity involved in dodging academic responsibilities was a challenge in itself, a game of wits against the watchful eyes of their tutors and proctors. A student named Bartholomew from Heidelberg, known for his cunning, once fabricated a letter from a fictitious ailing aunt complete with a wax seal he painstakingly forged, to explain his absence for a week, a feat that earned him legendary status among his peers. Vandalism, though rarely malicious in the modern sense, was another popular outlet for student frustration. Lecture halls, with their rows of uncomfortable benches and stern pulpits, often bore the brunt of student discontent. Students would carve their names, satirical verses about their professors, or crude drawings into the wooden benches and walls. Some might even deface valuable manuscripts or college records, though this was a far riskier endeavor with severe consequences if caught. The urge to leave a permanent mark, to defile the symbols of their academic confinement, was a powerful rebellious impulse. Imagine a scholar named Fitzwilliam, tired of a particularly dry lecture on logic, discreetly carving a caricature of his balding professor onto the underside of his desk, a silent act of defiance against the monotony. Harassing professors was a particularly cherished form of entertainment. This could range from subtle acts of disrespect to outright disruption. Students might mock a professor's lecture delivery, imitate his mannerisms behind his back, or even write satirical poems about his quirks and eccentricities. Some bolder students might throw small objects like wadded-up parchment or fruit pits at an unsuspecting lecturer. There are even accounts of students locking professors out of their own classrooms or rigging doors to fall on their heads, though this was extremely rare and severely punished. The sheer impudence of these actions, the audacity to challenge the intellectual and social superiors, provided a thrilling rush. A particularly notorious incident occurred at the University of Bologna, where students once tied a goat to the bell rope of a college bell tower during a sacred morning mass, causing utter chaos and disrupting the solemn proceedings for hours, a prank that became legendary for its sheer audacity. Beyond the academic setting, students engaged in general mischief within the town. Loud, unauthorized parties in student lodgings were common, often disturbing neighbors and drawing the attention of the town watch. Some students would engage in petty theft, pilfering food from market stalls or borrowing items from unsuspecting townspeople, not out of necessity, but for the sheer thrill of it. moaning townspeople from upper windows, serenading them with off-key or bawdy songs, or simply creating disturbances in public spaces, were all part of the student repertoire. These acts, though seemingly minor, were a critical way for students to assert their autonomy, push boundaries, and simply release the immense pressure of a life dictated by bells, books, and strict rules. The satisfaction of a prank pulled off, or a rule cleverly circumvented, offered a powerful sense of agency and rebellion against the rigid structure of medieval university life. Number 1. Drinking, gambling, and rowdy taverns. When the weight of scholastic life became unbearable, when the Latin texts blurred before their eyes and the theological debates felt endless, medieval students flocked to the taverns. These establishments were the heart of student social life, vibrant, noisy, and often illicit spaces where scholars could shed their academic robes, literally and figuratively, and immerse themselves in a world of drink, gambling, and uninhibited revelry. For many, the tavern was a second home, a place of escape, camaraderie, and often trouble. Imagine stepping into a medieval tavern in the University District of Paris in the year 1280. Air would be thick with the smells of stale ale, wood smoke, and unwashed bodies. The main room would be dimly lit by sputtering candles and a roaring fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn wooden tables and benches. The noise would be deafening. The clatter of tankards, the boisterous laughter of patrons, the occasional shout of an argument, and the off-key singing of drunken scholars. Students, distinguishable by their slightly finer clothing and perhaps the remnants of ink stains on their fingers, would rub shoulders with merchants, laborers, and even the occasional soldier. It was a melting pot of urban life, far removed from the cloistered world of the colleges. Ale was the drink of choice brewed locally and consumed in vast quantities. It was weaker than modern beer, often cloudy and nutritious enough to be considered a staple of the diet. Students would consume flagons upon flagons, often ordering round after round, their inhibitions loosening with each draught. For those with more money, wine, sometimes spiced or watered down, was also available, though it was a more expensive luxury. The sheer volume of alcohol consumed was staggering, contributing to the boisterous atmosphere and the inevitable disputes that often erupted. A student named Thomas from Merton College, Oxford, was famously recorded in a disciplinary roll for racking up an astronomical debt at the Boar's Head Tavern, a sum that would have bought several valuable manuscripts. Gambling was an integral part of the tavern experience. Dice games were particularly popular, with hazard being a common and fast-paced game that could quickly deplete a student's meager allowance. The clatter of dice on wooden tables, the excited cries, and the frustrated groans were constant background noise. Students would wager their last coin, their textbooks, or even promises of future inheritances. Card games, though newer to Europe in the High Middle Ages, were also beginning to gain popularity, offering another avenue for students to test their luck and quick wits. The thrill of a win, even a small one, offered a brief surge of power and excitement, a stark contrast to the slow, methodical pace of academic learning. The sting of a loss could lead to desperate measures, further debt, or even petty crime. Beyond the drinking and gambling, taverns were social hubs. Students from different faculties, different nations, groups based on geographical origin, and even different colleges would gather, sharing gossip, complaining about their professors, planning escapades, and forming lifelong friendships. Bawdy songs, often improvised on the spot, would be sung at the top of their lungs, their lyrics mocking authority, celebrating vice, or simply expressing the frustrations of student life. Arguments fueled by alcohol and the competitive nature of scholars were frequent, sometimes escalating into full-blown brawls that spilled out into the streets, drawing the attention of the town watchman. For a student like Bartholomew from Heidelberg, the tavern was where he felt truly alive, away from the dry pronouncements of his philosophy tutor. a place where he could debate, jest, and simply be himself, unburdened by the expectations of academia. Taverns were more than just places to drink. They were vital spaces of freedom, rebellion, and social connection, offering a powerful, albeit often chaotic, escape valve for the pressures of medieval student life.